I travel a lot for work. Sometimes it's just a few days, sometimes a couple of weeks. Because of that, my house usually sits empty while I'm gone. It's nothing huge or flashy, but it's the first place I ever truly owned. I spent years saving for it, working overtime and living in tiny apartments just so I could finally buy a home that was mine. Before leaving for my most recent work trip, I asked my younger brother, Daniel, if he could stop by once in a while and check on the place. Water the plants, grab the mail, maybe turn on the lights so it didn't look abandoned. Daniel agreed right away. At the time, I thought I was doing him a favor too. My brother had never really been good with money. He jumped between jobs constantly, and things were always tight for him and his wife. They had 2 young kids, and every few months there seemed to be some new problem with rent or bills. So giving him a spare key felt like the right thing to do. "Don't worry," he told me before I left. "I'll keep an eye on everything." 2 weeks later, I came home late at night after a long flight. All I wanted was a hot shower and a few hours of sleep in my own bed. But the moment I walked up to my front door, something felt wrong. I slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. I pulled the key out and tried again, thinking maybe I was just tired. Still nothing. The key wouldn't even fit properly. That's when I noticed something strange. The lock looked different. At first I thought maybe Daniel had replaced it because it was old or broken. It had been sticking lately, so that explanation almost made sense. But if he changed it, why didn't he tell me? Confused, I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. But then I heard something from inside. Voices. A television. Children laughing. My confusion quickly turned into a knot in my stomach. I walked around the side of the house and looked through the living room window and froze. Daniel's kids were sitting at my dining table eating dinner. His wife was standing in my kitchen, cooking like she had done it 1,000 times before. And Daniel himself was sitting comfortably on my couch, watching TV. For a few seconds, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It felt like I was looking into someone else's house. Except it wasn't. It was mine. I knocked hard on the window. Daniel turned his head slowly toward the sound. When he saw me standing outside in the dark, his expression barely changed. In fact, he didn't look surprised at all. He sighed, stood up from the couch, and walked toward the front door. When he opened it, he only pulled it halfway. "Oh," he said casually, "you're back already." I stared at him, trying to keep my voice steady. Why can't I open my own door? Daniel leaned against the doorframe like this was a normal conversation. "Well," he said slowly, "about that." He stepped aside slightly, revealing the living room behind him, filled with his family's things. Then he shrugged. We moved in. For a moment, I honestly thought Daniel was joking. But when I stepped inside the house, it became clear he wasn't. My living room looked completely different. Boxes were stacked near the walls. Kids' backpacks were hanging from the chairs. Toys were scattered across the floor like they had been there for weeks. Daniel's wife stood in the kitchen, stirring something in a pan like she belonged there. She gave me a small, awkward smile. "Hi," she said quietly. I turned slowly back to my brother. "What exactly is going on here?" Daniel shut the door behind me and walked into the living room. "Our lease ended," he said casually. "The landlord raised the rent again. We couldn't afford it." I stared at him. "So you decided to break into my house?" "We didn't break in," he replied quickly. "You gave me the spare key, remember?" "That was to check the mail, Daniel." He shrugged like the difference didn't matter. "Well, we needed somewhere to stay." I ran a hand through my hair, trying to stay calm. "You changed the locks." "Yeah," he said. "The old ones were terrible anyway." My patience was disappearing fast. "You can't just move your family into my house." At that point, his wife stepped forward. "Look, we didn't have a lot of options," she said. "It was either this or a motel." Daniel nodded toward the hallway. "And honestly," he added, "you've got plenty of space." I laughed in disbelief. "That's not the point." He crossed his arms, his expression becoming more defensive. "You're barely even here," he said. The house just sits empty most of the time. So that gives you the right to take it? Daniel sighed, like I was the one being difficult. Why are you acting like this? We're family. That word again. Family. The same word people used whenever they wanted something from you. I pointed toward the boxes and toys covering my living room. This isn't staying here. Daniel's expression hardened. Actually, it might. I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? He walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a piece of paper. Then he handed it to me. At first glance, it looked like some kind of basic agreement form. But when I read the top line, my stomach dropped. It was a tenant agreement. I scanned the document quickly. According to it, Daniel and his family were renting the house. From me, my eyes moved to the bottom of the page. Right under the landlord's name was my signature, or at least something that looked almost exactly like it. I slowly raised my head and looked at my brother. You forged my signature. Daniel leaned back against the counter with a small smile. Not forged, he said calmly, just recreated. I stared at him in disbelief. You think this is going to hold up? Daniel shrugged again. Well, he said, until someone proves it's fake, we live here. Daniel leaned against the counter like he had already won. For a moment, the room was completely silent. His wife watched nervously while the kids kept eating at the table, unaware of what was happening. I looked down at the fake agreement again. Then I looked back at him. You really thought this through, didn't you? Daniel smirked. I had to. You would have said no otherwise. I nodded slowly. You're right. He crossed his arms confidently. So, what now? I pulled my phone out of my pocket. That depends. Daniel frowned. On what? On how fast they get here. His expression changed slightly. Who? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked over to the couch and sat down like I had all the time in the world. About 10 minutes later, headlights flashed through the living room window. A car pulled into the driveway. Daniel walked to the window and looked outside. The moment he saw the police car, the color drained from his face. 2 officers knocked on the door. I stood up and opened it. Evening, one of them said. We received a call about a possible property dispute. I handed them the paper Daniel had given me. This might explain it. They studied the document for a moment. Then one of the officers looked directly at Daniel. Did the homeowner sign this? Daniel hesitated. That pause was all the officer needed. He turned back to me. Sir, are you the owner of this property? Yes. And did you sign this agreement? No. The officer nodded slowly. Then he looked back at my brother. That makes this document a forged contract. Daniel's confidence vanished instantly. Within minutes, the officers told him and his family to pack their things and leave the house. As Daniel stood there in my living room, surrounded by the suitcases he had brought in, he finally realized something. The house was never his, and it never would be.